So, starting Instagram Live, and, whoops, almost fell over there. Nobody's on yet. A few people just joined. Welcome. And, there's not really much news today in general. Like, the biggest news, of course, is that the Congress just passed fully the stimulus bill, the stimulus package, which is great news for kind of buffering the economy. It won't save the economy, though. You can't transfer the economy from stores and businesses to the government. The government just can't write checks to everybody. Although they are going to write checks for everybody, they can't do it forever. They're going to do it for the next month, hopefully maybe the month after that. But the stimulus package in general looks pretty good. A family of four will get up to $3,000 in direct checks. They're structuring it to all look like income tax refunds to make it as smooth as possible, as opposed to just setting up an entirely new system. But so the good news again is that the stimulus package got passed. But I want to stress the stimulus package is certainly going to help. And in fact, it's a $2 trillion stimulus package. There's also another $3, $4, $5 trillion that the Federal Reserve is going to pump into the economy. So these are huge numbers. Don't forget that the economy, the entire economy in the U.S. is $15 trillion. And if you add $5 or $6 trillion to the economy, if you add 33% growth to the economy, that's never happened before in history. It's just we don't know in the long run what will happen, but in the short run, there's going to be enormous stimulus. So there's money going to retailers, it's going to the travel industry, going to banks. They're writing direct checks to every individual in the country. And someone says help mostly to corporations. I don't think that's true. There's something like $300 billion set aside to be direct checks to individuals. So that's kind of huge. And then another big thing, I don't know if it's $300 or $500 billion, but they're extending unemployment insurance. They're making unemployment insurance have higher payments. So that's all to individuals. And by the way, stimulus to corporations, they're mandating that, for instance, small business loans, there's like something like $300 or $400 billion or $500 billion set aside for small business loans. But the loans are forgiven if you don't fire your employees. So this is really good for individuals. But someone says stimulus was necessary, but it's really important that people realize this is a Band-Aid. Now, it's a very good Band-Aid. It's a very large Band-Aid. In fact, it's kind of like you're mummifying the entire economy. You're giving so much. You're practically gonna, who knows, this is gonna make the economy go up by like 50% when the economy normally goes up 2 or 3% a year. But this doesn't solve the main problem. The main problem is that people can't go to work. And so, this week we saw the other day how many new people applied for unemployment insurance. And people were expecting it to be about 1 million or so, maybe 1.5 million. And even if it was 1.5 million, that would have been the largest ever in history. The largest number of unemployed people in history filing in 1 week. Instead, it was 3.1 million new filings. That's unbelievable. So 3 million people were unemployed last week. 3 new people. And what's going to happen next week? It's going to be another 3 million people. There are 50 million people in the restaurant industry alone, and all the restaurants are out of business. If the average restaurant only has 16 days of cash in the bank to survive. Well, we've been kind of on lockdown in most states for more than 16 days. So restaurants are largely going out of business. Now, fortunately, this stimulus package has a lot of stimulus to restaurants and other retail outlets and other street-facing stores. So that's good news. But you still need to get people to start going out to eat. You can't keep providing stimulus every month. Now, this will again be a good Band-Aid. I think that we're not going to feel it right away because we're all sort of inside. but we are going to start feeling it around August, September. The Dow right now is at 22,000. I would say by the end of the year, the Dow will be back to 30,000. And then 2021, I wouldn't be surprised because of all this stimulus. Without the stimulus, I think the Dow would have had a normal year next year. Maybe it would have gone up 10, 15%. But now I think the Dow is going to probably go up to 40,000 by the end of next year, just because this stimulus package is so huge. And it's a good thing. I agree we needed stimulus. I think it was incredibly important. And a lot of the stimulus and a lot of funding is going towards getting medical equipment to the states. Here's the main issue. So here's the thing. The news media is just constantly trying to scare everybody. Like last night there was a headline, U.S. is the leader now in number of confirmed cases. Horrible, horrible news. That was the headline. U.S. is the leader in confirmed cases. Are you kidding me that that's the headline? What about the fact that the U.S. is testing now more than any other country has tested? And that's, of course, the more tests you do, the more cases you're going to have. So it's sort of a good thing to say that we are testing now more than ever. China was initially helping us out by giving us all these tests. Well, it turns out those tests have not been working. Spain even sent back the Chinese tests. So now we're doing our own tests. Testing is higher than ever. So, of course, cases are higher than ever. Another thing that I saw, so this is more reason why to avoid the news. Anybody who's going to say with the headline, U.S. is leader in number of new cases, completely neglected to mention that also the U.S. is leader in the number of tests given. So, of course, there's going to be new cases. You have to ignore headlines like that. Here's another thing that I saw this past week. So I forget if it was last week or whenever it was, but this billionaire investor went on the news and said, we need to shut down the entire U.S. right now, blah, blah, blah. And that scared everybody. This is a famous investor. That scared everybody. And the Dow that day had its second worst day in all of history, second worst day since 1933, the worst day since 1933. Well, guess what? This billionaire investor, turns out he was betting against the market, but didn't quite say that. And he made something like $2 billion on his investment against the market. He wrote a letter to his investors yesterday. So again, you can't trust anything I don't really trust anything in the media. I don't know what media to trust. So instead of believing in the media, I'm focused on talking to doctors, talking to economists, when possible, having them on my podcast. You'll see the past 4 weeks, I've had doctors of all walks of life on my podcast, 4 or 5 doctors. And this weekend, I'm talking to a very well-known economist about what this stimulus means. And I'll summarize the results of that on Monday, but that'll also be in the podcast on Monday. And it was Bill Ackman made $2 billion on a bet against the markets. He neglected or I don't know, maybe he did, but I didn't see it. He didn't tell the news. I didn't see it. Allegedly, he didn't tell the news that when he was saying the U.S. should shut down, he forgot to mention, oh, by the way, I'm investing against the U.S. economy, which, by the way, wouldn't have turned out to be a very good investment. But at least before you listen to anybody's news or you listen to anybody's statements, try to figure out what their agendas are. I always say there's a good reason and a real reason. So if my daughter was to say, for instance, oh, Dad, I'm going to the library to study and do my homework, that's a really good reason. But the real reason, you can't argue against the good reason, but the real reason might be, oh, she wants to hang out with boys at the library. So there's always a good reason and there's a real reason. When somebody says, oh, we could see 150 million cases in the U.S., there's a good reason and there's a real reason. The good reason might be some mathematical model that doesn't apply in the real world. And the real reason might be they want to get published or they want to get famous, or if their prediction proves correct, they'll have a huge win. And if it's not correct, they'll say, oh, well, our good thing we warned everybody, so our warning was correct. So either way, a good point, boys don't go to the library, so it might be that the good reason is the real reason. Again, every article I'm reading that focuses on the negative, yes, this is a horrible virus. There's deaths. There's more deaths every day. As I mentioned the other day, there was a headline I saw the other day. Number of deaths rise to all-time high. Guess what? Every single day, the number of deaths rise to an all-time high because you can't bring people back from the dead. So that's a stupid headline. So again, here's the numbers that I'm looking at, which is I go directly to one of 2 or 3 sites. Like I go to worldometers.com or worldometers.info to see the latest number of cases and deaths. And really the most important one is number of daily new cases. Number of daily new cases in China, number of daily new cases in Italy, number of daily new cases in the US. Now, daily new cases in China. So what would I do now if I was president? I'll tell you what I would do. And then I'll discuss again the daily new cases number. So this is what I think they will do, and this is what I would do, which is some states have almost no cases and no deaths. You know, there's more people dying in traffic accidents. This lockdown has saved more people's lives from traffic accidents than from coronavirus. Not everywhere, but in some states. Like some of these states, like Ohio, was predicting hundreds of thousands of cases a few weeks ago. Well, they hardly have any cases. There's 15 deaths, which is horrible. Every death is horrible. But why can't, Ohio has millions of people living there. Why doesn't Ohio go back to work? I would unquarantine and I would bring back to work every business under several conditions. One is the state is not a hotspot, so it's not New York or California. So states like Ohio should be going back to work, West Virginia, all these states where, in fact, there's a lot of people struggling right now from unemployment and worse. These states should go back to work. Unquarantine, start off unquarantining by age group. So people under 40, then people under 50, then people under 60, and all the time keep track of the data. Always quarantine positives, just like we do with the flu. People who have the flu stay home. Usually their family stays home. So quarantine people who are susceptible of pre-existing conditions. But in general, let people out of the house. Like, I'll give you an example. New York City is under total lockdown. Every single business is closed. But so somebody makes this really good point. I know I keep switching subjects. The virus has made it harder to get a transplant. That's really true. The virus has made it harder to get organ transplants. The virus has made it harder for people to get their cancer medications and chemo. The virus has made it harder for people who have chronic illnesses to get treated appropriately. So there's many deaths being caused by this quarantine. And so you have to ask state by state, not for the whole United States, but state by state. Maybe I'm using Ohio as an example. You could probably use 40 or 45 other states as examples. Start to unquarantine state by state, region by region, age group by age group. And I do believe that will happen within the next... Look, if it doesn't happen next week, we're going to have another 3 million people unemployed. If it doesn't happen a week after that, maybe we'll have 1 or 2 million more people unemployed. And by the way, the number of unemployed will even out. But you can't... This society can't afford 20 million people unemployed. And that's the direction that we're heading. What city do you think is doing the best job? It's hard to say because, I would say New York City is dealing with this. New York City right now is almost half the deaths in the United States. If you take out the deaths in New York City, the United States has about 800 deaths in a population of 328 million. And many people, even Bill Gates, expects that this virus will peak sometime in April. I've been saying April 15th, give or take a week. Other people are saying early April. This guy Neil Ferguson said about the UK yesterday, another 2 or 3 weeks, which also corresponds to about April 15th. Bill Gates said more towards the end of April. So who knows? But if you take out the deaths in New York City, the rest of the United States has about 800 deaths, which again is horrible. But many of these people also had pre-existing conditions. And just like in Italy, there's a horrible number of deaths. But I think maybe 9,000 deaths now in Italy in a population of 60 million people. But 99% of them had pre-existing conditions, and most of them are older than the age of 70. The average death from coronavirus in Italy, the average age is 79.5. Average life expectancy in Italy, 80. So the number of actual deaths that have occurred these months in Italy have not risen the average number of deaths that Italy normally experiences. So we have to start saying, yes, every death is horrible, but we don't react like this as a society for the flu. We don't react like this about suicides. Worldwide, 800,000 people a year die from suicide. Far fewer will die from this, most likely, unless you believe the mathematical models that so last night, Dr. Birx, who's been a real straight shooter at these press conferences, she said that most of these mathematical models are ridiculous and there's no way that we're going to have this many cases, this many deaths. No other country has. And people say, well, this country did a lockdown, this country did aggressive testing, but now U.S. is doing more tests than ever. We're doing lockdowns. One scientist suggested maybe we need to do intermittent lockdowns. So, okay, get everybody back to work. We check out the data, and then maybe there's another wave in the fall or the winter of next year. Do another quarantining or quarantining by region, but by then we'll have much more surgical, protective equipment, more ventilators, and so on. So we'll be able to help. I think it's a good thing now that hospitals are starting to get the masks that they need. Even in New York City, they have the masks that they need. Now Cuomo is saying we need more ventilators, so he should get more ventilators. But at the moment, New York City has enough ventilators, but the anticipation is that we'll need more, which you might as well get more ventilators. And there are companies making them. So there's just been another good thing is there's been real activation of the private sector in terms of creating respirators, in terms of creating surgical masks. Like, for instance, just announced today, ResMed, the stock symbol's RMD. I don't own the stock. ResMed that makes these masks for sleep apnea. So now they're converting a lot of these masks to respirators and maybe ventilators. So we'll see. Like, all of these companies are kicking into gear to help people. But again, I feel the news is just so panicky. They pick the headline that is just the worst headline. Just like again, I started off saying U.S. is now the leader in coronavirus cases, and that was the scary headline last night. Well, guess what? Of course we're the leader. We're also the leader in number of tested. The more you test, the more cases you're going to find. And by the way, the more asymptomatic cases they're finding. So the more cases you find, the lower the fatality rate goes. So we see how serious this virus is. So we need to aggressively test. So all the things that we're doing are good. We're aggressively testing. We're giving the hospitals more equipment. By the way, the U.S. healthcare system is not as bad as people say. In terms of ICU beds per 100,000 people, U.S. is 34. Italy only has 12, which could explain why all the Italy hospitals have been overflowing. And the U.S. Hospitals are starting, particularly in New York City, are starting to overflow. So hopefully a lot of the measures and a lot of the funding that's happening is going to solve that. But again, I'll tell you the numbers that I'm keeping track of. Daily new cases and daily new deaths in China. So China, supposedly the virus is over, and so we'd really see that if there's a decrease in new deaths. And now that people are going back to work in China, are the new deaths going up? And the answer is no. So yesterday, March 26th, daily new deaths in China was 5. At their peak, there were 150 new daily deaths in China every single day. So the fact that the Chinese have been going back to work, the factories have been reopening, but the number of cases are going down to almost zero. The number of new deaths is down to almost zero. This is a good sign that there hasn't been a spike in cases in China or South Korea since they've started going back to work. So in the U.S., cases have been going up, but not huge. Like, this virus is supposed to double every 3 days, but now we've seen around 250 new deaths a day, every single day, for a good 4 or 5 days. I don't know how long, but we're hopefully starting to stabilize. We'll see. I don't expect the data to be great, but it's important to keep track of the data. Again, every death is horrible. People die. I think it's something like 7,500 people a day die in the U.S. All of those deaths are horrible. You can't ignore 7,500 other deaths, but it's important to make sure that this disease is not going up exponentially. It does not look like it's going up exponentially. It looks like it's going to eventually flatten. That's what I'm hoping. It's easy for things to double when there's only 100 cases. But now that there's, I don't know how many cases there are, 30,000 cases, we'll see if it doubles in 3 days. My guess is number of new deaths will not double or the number of new deaths will not double in the next 3 days. That seems very unlikely. So it's also worth noting that the Chinese stock market, while originally I thought it had gone back to all-time highs, but it's gone back to where it was before. So the stock market recovered in China. Now, every time there's hints of good news in the US, the stock market goes up. But when there's no news or there's bad news, the stock market goes down. I think that will continue for a while. We're not really going to have. So the biggest news that's happened is that, Italy still might be in stabilization mode. They had a spike yesterday, but we'll see. But the biggest thing is it's pretty clear that these pandemics, this virus in particular, has a peak and an end, and that it seems to last like 3, maybe 4 months in every country that it's at. And the whole goal, now, we should still do social distancing. We should still quarantine positives and people who are susceptible. We should still avoid large gatherings. This is kind of obvious. It's not one or the other. It's not you either shut down the entire United States or you open the economy. You could open the economy and still have all the measures in place that will have the best results for health. So they're not against each other. We overreacted when we shut down every single business. If you shut down every business, there's 28 million small businesses in the world. These are not huge corporations. These are businesses with a dozen or so employees. They're all going to go out of work. And then how are they going to feed their family? There's going to be a rise in violent crimes, opiate deaths, suicides, homicides. So I don't mean to say this as bad news. I think everybody's aware of this. That's why they passed this economic stimulus. But that's why the next step now, and I expect this will happen, first, hopefully no later than the second week of April, is that you're going to start to see us, opening up the economy in regions. So maybe the Midwest, maybe the South, and then eventually New York City. After New York City peaks, New York City is having its worst time ever right now, and the data is probably going to get worse before it gets better. But at least number of new deaths is under control. At least the hospitals are overflowing, but they're not beyond capacity yet, and hopefully medical equipment arrives already. Protective equipment has arrived, like face masks and so on. So somebody says, are we entering a 5-year depression? No, we're not entering a 5-year depression, because think about it. The economy as a whole is $15 trillion. That's the average size of the economy every year, $15 trillion, and it goes up about 2% a year. They just passed a $2 trillion stimulus package, and there's already $4 trillion in stimulus that the Federal Reserve has promised. So that's $6 trillion. What happens when you add $6 trillion to a $15 trillion economy? That's 40% growth. The economy grows on average 2%. So what happens when you have a 40% growth injected into the economy? We don't really know. It's never happened before. In the Great Depression, just to be very clear, in 1929, they actually did the reverse of stimulus in 1929 and 1930. This is probably why Herbert Hoover is considered one of the worst presidents in history, is because instead of adding stimulus to the economy right when the economy needed it in 1929, we did the reverse. The reason we did the reverse is we kind of wanted the reason the government did the opposite of stimulus in 1929 is because it wanted to scare people into saving money and not being too speculative like they were in the Roaring '20s. But that's not the situation here. We are here doing the playbook that the government did in the 2008-2009 financial crisis, but triple that. We're giving triple the stimulus that we released. Remember, the TARP bill was $700 billion. That was passed in 2008 and then used in 2009. And the economy roared for the next 11 years. But what happened today? We passed a $2.1 trillion stimulus package that's going directly in the hands of consumers. So that's 3 times the stimulus that went into the economy in 2009. In addition, the Federal Reserve putting another $4 trillion in. So look, we'll see on the economy. I think the main thing is this stimulus package was good, but only if we get back to work in April. I do think we'll get back to work in April. Trump has hinted at it. Even Bill Gates has said the peak could occur in April. So on all sides of the spectrum, I hope it doesn't get too political. The shame has been how this virus has become partisan instead of bipartisan, but fortunately the stimulus package was released. And I do think we're going to get back to work. I do think the economy is going to soar by the end of the year. And you can't even predict how much it's going to soar. Assuming we get back to work, assuming the virus peaks, even if we have a second wave of the virus, we'll be much better prepared for it. We're going to certainly expect a second wave. So hospitals will be prepared. We should continue social distancing. Elderly should be quarantined. Positive should be quarantined. But the economy is going to get back to work. An extra $6 trillion of stimulus is going to be in there. The stock market's going to soar because of the stimulus. Why is the stock market going to soar? Because it has to soar. Where else? The $6 trillion is going to be spent, and then it's going to be put in people's bank accounts, and then it's going to be invested. So some good things in this stimulus package. You can borrow off of your 401k without getting fees or penalties. That's a good thing. There's going to be loans for small businesses. There's going to be checks sent to every single American who makes below a certain amount. So including your kids are going to get checks. So this is enormous. The average family of four is going to get $3,000. And so again, assuming rents and mortgages are put off, you only need that money for food right now if you're under a quarantine. If quarantine is released, then you'll get back to getting your paycheck, or there'll be more opportunities for jobs. By the way, not every company is firing people. I think Amazon announced they're going to hire 100,000 people. Walmart announced they're going to hire hundreds of thousands of people. Even Kroger's, this grocery chain in the Midwest, even Kroger's, they're going to hire 10,000 people. CVS announced they're going to hire 50,000 new people. So a lot of companies Zoom Technologies is hiring people. So a lot of companies are beginning to hire people. It's just the economy's changing. There's going to be a new normal. But one thing is, I would encourage people, just because the media says something, or just because even the government says something, don't just take it at face value. Like, this is, again, I almost use it facetiously, but you got to be worried about when there's headlines like National Guard called in to enforce social distancing. That feels, everybody must stay in their homes. That feels a little bit like 1984-ish. So again, every death is horrible, and I'm in favor of social distancing, quarantining positives, quarantining people who are susceptible to this. But you don't want to have anything that feels like a lockdown of all of society. The economy is society. The economy is not different from the society. The economy is not a light switch you could turn off for 3 months and then turn it back on. You can in Italy because nobody works in Italy. You can in China because it's a communist country that depends on America to keep buying from it. But you can't lock down the economy in the US. The economy, Main Street and the economy are the exact same thing. You and I work in the economy, and I think the government is realizing that. They've hinted that, again, that they're going to get people back to work. So, first off, I'll look at the screen, ask some questions, everybody. I'll wait around for some questions. While I do think it's useful to look around at this time and look at the positives, I know that's very hard. That's very anxiety producing. Here's what I've been doing. I've been feeling anxiety, and it gets worse at night because that's when kind of all the headlines come out, like, oh, new deaths, surge, blah, blah, blah. I'm trying not to look at the news at night, trying to read books or watch. I actually am watching more TV than I should. I've watched at least 4 different sitcoms, and now I'm binge watching Breaking Bad, which is an excellent show. So which sector will face bubble burst after stimulus package? So I think the biggest sector that's going to do well is technology. Anything that encourages remote and distance learning or remote working. So you have companies like Amazon, which delivers. You have companies that make drones. You have companies that make robots. Robots are going to be more important than ever, particularly in healthcare. You have companies like Walmart, which now is doing deliveries and is part of the entire supply chain of the economy. So these companies are going to do very well. I kind of think the companies that will do worse are definitely anything relating to tourism or housing or like cruise lines and airlines and things like that. So what do I think will happen to the cruise industry? I think the cruise industry is probably gonna be on life support for at least a year or two. And, there's the cruise industry is specifically carved out in this stimulus package. Stimulus money for entrepreneurs, that's a good question. I don't know. Now, small businesses are going to be able to take out loans, but, entrepreneurs need to, I think entrepreneurs got too used to the crack pipe being given them by venture capitalists. So somebody would come up with an idea. Oh, I have an idea. And then they would go to venture capitalists and try to get their idea funded. I think that's going to slow down for good reason. That was artificial anyway. Like, why should Uber, which is worth something like, I don't know, tens of billions of dollars, they're not going to be able to turn a profit for years. I don't know if they'll ever be able to turn a profit. Like, Uber, all of our Uber rides have been paid for by venture capitalists and now the stock market. So entrepreneurs should start having the mindset, hey, I need to be profitable immediately if I'm going to start a business. I've started many businesses in the past 20 years, in the past 25 years. The only businesses that have ever worked for me personally are businesses that were profitable in the first or second month. If you can't be profitable that fast, that's certainly possible, and then you need funding. But I think entrepreneurs will get back to more, just bread and butter entrepreneurship. You got to be profitable. You have to have customers right away. Those are the best businesses. Would you borrow against 401k if you were 40? Absolutely. I would borrow every dime I could right now off of my 401k, because you never know when different parts, if in a worst case scenario, you never know when different parts of the system might get shut down and you're able to, if you can borrow off of your 401k without penalties and without being taxed for it, absolutely borrow every dollar you can off of your 401k. Why? Cash is king. Being liquid and having cash in the bank is really important. So, and if you don't have any penalties, here's the problem with 401k anyway. Why just make this money and then a second later give it to Wall Street until you're age 59 and a half? Use the money now to better yourself, or to take courses, or to start businesses, or just, I sleep better at night the more cash I have in the bank at night. Don't you guys? Like, if I'm worried every day about the stock market or about my 401k or about the value of my house, I can't sleep at night in exactly times like this. So you want to do the things, it's very important, whether it's 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks before the economy starts to reopen. And by the way, it's going to reopen in that time frame, almost certainly. That I have really no fears about, and also good that we have this stimulus package. But very important to do the things that reduce stress. What reduces stress? Well, this is not, in all these articles about how to reduce stress, this is never mentioned, but have as much cash as you can in the bank. So if you can borrow off of the 401k, if you can get this check from the government, if you're a small business and you could take out a loan that's going to be forgiven in a few months, if you could take out a loan from the government right now because of the stimulus package, just get it. Just get as much cash in the bank as you can. If you don't pay down credit card debt right now, no way would I be paying down any credit card debt. I've never actually had a credit card in my life, but I would not be paying down credit card debt right now. The other thing is, it's very good to reach out to people and talk to friends. I've had a lot of success these past few weeks, not only reaching out to my friends, but reaching out to people I don't know and just kind of congratulating them on things they've done. Like, I'll reach out to people maybe who are, famous people who were on my podcast years ago who I don't usually talk to, but I'll write a letter to them and say, hey, thank you for doing X, Y, and Z in your business. Hope all is well. And they're almost always responding. So it's a good way to kind of keep your networking going even better while we're all quarantined. So I'm not a really good networker, to be honest. I'm very shy about sending people emails, but I've been sending emails to all sorts of people. People I have no clue if they know me or not, but I remind them, hey, you were on my podcast 4 years ago, 5 years ago. By the way, congratulations on keeping all your employees hired. Hope you and your family are well. Thanks. I don't ask for anything. I just remind them that I exist. That's like networking. And, I think I could probably be a little bit more productive. I think when I've been productive, I completely forget about this virus. So for instance, if you're a comedian, work on new jokes. If you're a writer, write a book. It's really hard to do, though. It's really hard to be productive. And so I don't agree with everyone who says, and I was saying this early on too, be productive every day. that's really hard because there's so much anxiety. It's almost like being given a homework assignment in the middle of the worst crisis in history. You can't always be productive every single day. But that said, when I have been productive, the days that I've been most productive are usually the days that my stress is the lowest. So just keep that in mind when you wake up in the morning. Instead of immediately going to the latest news, maybe try to be productive a little bit. Yesterday, so I'm in New York City. So every business is closed in New York City. There's complete lockdown, but there isn't a lock. You're allowed to go outside as long as you maintain social distancing. You could take a walk. Being outside and being in the sun actually boosts your immune system. So it's very good to fight against the virus if you could walk around the block in the sun. Actually, for the first time in 20 years, the first time since January 1st, 1996, I rode a bicycle. And, there's all these free bikes in New York City and there's apps to unlock them. So I rode a bicycle in the sun. It's the first time since January 1st, 1996. January 1st, 1996, I was dating somebody and she said, let's get bicycles on January 1st. And I did. And the first thing she did was picked up heroin, which I broke up with her after that. I didn't even know that was her thing. So that was bad news. So the last time I rode a bicycle was bad news. But yesterday I rode a bicycle again. Fortunately, my wife didn't take us to her heroin hotspot. We rode in the park. There was people outside in the park, but everyone was maintaining, 10 feet distance from each other. And people were wearing masks. People are doing the right thing, which is why, don't forget, South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, Japan, these places did not shut down a single business. And they go outside every day, but they have social distancing. They wear masks. They keep apart from each other. If you're tested positive, you get quarantined. The U.S. now is doing more tests than any other country. People are getting quarantined if they test positive. This is what we should be doing. This is called flattening the curve. Are any hospitals overwhelmed? Yes. In New York City, there are hospitals that are overwhelmed. I haven't really heard about other cities, but New York City is getting more equipment. They've already gotten surgical masks from outside industry. Hopefully they'll get the ventilators that they need in time. Right now they have enough ventilators, but the prediction is they won't have enough in a week or so. So flattening the curve happens when we all do social distancing and when private industry gives us equipment. So now, again, all the models say that's going to be exponential growth. That's not the case. It's not going to be exponential growth. Every country, I'm looking at China right now, every country goes like this and then eventually goes down. So daily new cases and daily new deaths will eventually go down at the peak, starting at the peak. When will the peak happen? I've been saying for the past month that it'll happen around April 15th. Bill Gates just said he thinks it'll happen maybe a week or two after that. Some people, Neil Ferguson said yesterday it'll happen in the UK in 2 or 3 weeks, which is, maybe first or second week of April. So we have good cause to not panic at this point. Instead, we should be focused on how are we going to be when we get back to work. And if you're an investor, which industries will benefit? And if you're an entrepreneur, start to look at remote learning businesses, start to look at websites that benefit from more time at home. A lot of e-commerce sites will benefit. So there's a lot of businesses out there, and maybe tomorrow, Monday or Tuesday, I'll list all of the businesses that I think you should be interested in if you're being an entrepreneur. How long after the peak do people go back to work? Someone's asking. I actually think people will start going back to work region by region before the peak, because New York City accounts for almost 40% of the deaths that are in the United States in total. So that's just this one city. Why should the entire rest of the country stay home from work, with New York City being the one contributing 40% of the cases and the deaths? So New York City should probably still be quarantined, until the peak, but put Ohio back to work, put Indiana back to work, put Nevada back to work, put Utah back to work, put Wyoming back to work, put the South back to work. And for everybody else who's not back at work, go out in the sun now that the weather's getting a little better. It boosts your immune system. Take advantage of the networking that you could do right now. Reach out to people by email and say, look, I'm not going to call Richard Branson and say, hey, Richard, how's it going? But I will write an email and say, hey, remember you were on my podcast 2 or 3 years ago. I hope you're doing, well. Congratulations on doing this, this, and this for your businesses. Good luck. I'm not asking for anything, just networking. And China did a complete shutdown for 3 months. Well, first off, that's not true. China did a shutdown in Wuhan. They did a shutdown in Shanghai and Chengdu. They did not do a complete shutdown on the 1.3 billion people in China. They shut down the areas most at risk. So, period. They did not do a complete shutdown. China locked down the city at 9 p.m. and drafted, China locked down in Wuhan. New York City, by the way, is New York City, which is 40% of the cases in the U.S., New York City has pretty much done an almost complete lockdown. Many people have volunteered to work in healthcare. A lot of equipment has come into New York City, and more equipment is coming. So am I still taking lactoferrin? Yeah, but I don't know if it helps or not. Don't go by anything I take. Ask your doctor. But I've been taking lactoferrin, vitamin C, other vitamins. I've been trying to go outside for vitamin D. And by the way, I know not many, but I know at least now 14 people, roughly my age, some younger, some older, who have had coronavirus. One person was hospitalized. He was hospitalized for 4 days. Everyone has already recovered. I don't know anybody new who has it, so it'll be interesting to see how the data shapes up, but that's just my anecdotal experience. I don't know if Russia... So do I trust the latest China's numbers? Yes, I actually trust the latest China's numbers. You know why? Because the U.S. is neck deep in China right now studying those numbers. So China is not... Apple just opened 42 stores in China. The U.S. is analyzing China's data. Do I think they just had 3,000 deaths? No, I think they lied about that. But I think daily new deaths and daily new cases are I believe, those numbers. So is vaccine already developed? No, I don't believe it. I think there's something like 19 vaccine trials going on. So what's going to be good is if there's a second wave or if there's a wave next year, then we'll have a vaccine ready. It will also be interesting to see, will the number of deaths from this, by the time it's over, will this exceed the flu? My guess is this will be about 2/3, half to 2/3 of what the flu deaths are. And again, that's just a guess, but it's a guess based on, what happened in China, what happened in Italy, what's happening right now in Italy, what's happening in South Korea, what's happening in Japan, and even what's happening in the U.S. So what's happening in the U.S. in general is that the panic exceeded the reality. So now we'll know for sure when this hits a peak by mid to late April, hopefully even earlier. And we'll also know, it'll be interesting to see, will China's cases spike now that they're going back to work? So far, it looks like they haven't been spiking. Will the U.S. cases spike as we go back to work? We'll see. We'll find out by the end of April. So, all right, so someone says I talk bullshit. All I'm saying is, based on what other people have been talking to me on the medical side, on the economy side, I'm qualified to say what I think would happen. On the economy side, if everybody is out of work for another month, then unemployment will be around 20 million people. The data for that is we just saw 3.1 million filings for unemployment. The largest number before that was only 695,000. So clearly coronavirus in just 1 week of lockdown affected unemployment by an enormous factor, which is why both the Democrats and the Republicans passed a stimulus package. It was bipartisan because they saw how bad this lockdown is for the economy. The next thing that they're going to realize, and they've already started realizing it. I've gotten emails from high up people in the government. They've already realized that you can't keep the U.S. economy shut down for too long, or else society as we know it is over. So they're aware of this, and they're already figuring out a plan to bring back the economy in region by region and demographic by demographic until this peaks, and then they'll reopen the entire economy. So if you didn't pay taxes, can you get money? Probably not. But if you didn't pay taxes, then you save money anyway. Okay, someone just asked about oil. Oil has gone, since this crisis started, oil has gone from 55 to 20. I think right now it's at 21. So on the one hand, that's a bad thing because the oil industry will suffer a little bit. But on the other hand, think about this. That's a huge stimulus to the economy. The last 2 recessions we had, it was in part because oil went up to 150. So if oil is 20 instead of 150, that's actually another stimulus to the economy. So oil's going to go back to 50 when this is over. Maybe by the end of the year, maybe early next year, who knows. But oil being down so low is yet another stimulus in this economy. And oil is not down because of coronavirus. You could look into Google why oil is down. It's not down because of this virus. Okay, someone says, can you tell me what's going on in oil? What's going on in oil is that Saudi Arabia and Russia were having a conflict, and Russia depends on fracking and shale oil and stuff like that. Saudi Arabia gets cheap oil, so Saudi Arabia threatened to produce more oil, and so oil crashed $20 in a day. So it had nothing to do with coronavirus. Now it's down here still because of coronavirus, but guess what? Saudi Arabia doesn't even have the oil that they say they're going to produce. So oil is going to go back up. During this crisis, am I still writing down 10 ideas a day? I am. Yesterday, I've been writing down ideas for each chapter in the book that I'm writing. So I'm writing a book called Skip the Line. So what's happening is, as we get back into this economy, there's going to be a new normal. Some jobs will not come back. We're probably going to lose altogether between 5 and 15 million jobs, which is horrific. Fortunately, the stimulus package will help a little bit. But with the economy reopening, people are going to have to figure out how to change their passion, change their interest, and figure out how to monetize those new passions, and you want to go from being bad at your interest to being in the top 1% in order to make money. So my book is about, I've changed interests many times in my life. I was a computer programmer, and I was then I was making TV shows. Then I was an entrepreneur making websites. Then I was a hedge fund manager. Then I was a writer. So I've changed interests many times, but you only make money if you're in the top 1% of your interests. So my next book is about how to quickly skip the line and be very good at what you're interested in. And someone wants a Shabbat Shalom for me. Shabbat Shalom. Good luck with everything. Any tips, classes, books for fiction writers? Yeah. It's interesting about fiction. First off, I've been doing a book giveaway this week on Instagram of my favorite quarantine books. So if you go to Instagram, you go to my latest post, you'll see the book giveaway. You have to follow me, and then you have to make a comment. What are your 3 favorite books? But maybe next week or next month, I'll do a giveaway of my favorite books about writing. So Chuck Palahniuk just wrote, he's the author of Fight Club. He just wrote a great book. It's called Consider This, and it's a book, it's his writing advice. It's the best book on writing advice I've ever seen. But essentially, advice for fiction, take a classic story, take the story of Jesus, for instance, and map it onto some new story now. Like, for instance, Star Wars is a combination of the story of Jesus with science fiction and Westerns. The Legend of Bagger Vance by my good friend Steve Pressfield. It's a book about golf in the 1920s, but it's really almost beat by beat. It's a book, it's a copy of the most religious text in Hinduism, the Bhagavad Gita. If you can do a direct mapping of the Bhagavad Gita onto the Legend of Bagger Vance, which is a novel about golf in the 1920s in Georgia, and it's beat for beat. You'll see the characters are the same and everything's the same. So that's take a classic story that has survived for thousands of years and bring it into the modern world, and then start writing. Just start writing every day. By the way, when you write, a very good piece of advice is just keep writing, because whatever you write is going to be shit until the 4th or 5th draft anyway. So you might as well just write shit down and then just trust that you'll write a 4th draft. So do I follow any Indian authors? Yeah, I follow some classic authors like R.K. Narayan. I also, Bharati Mukherjee is a good writer of short stories. Hanif Qureshi he's in India, but he's in England, but his family's from India. He writes some excellent books. So anyway, I have a lot of Indian writers. Any more questions? Now I don't know. I don't see any questions yet. So I'm sure there's been some questions. So I'll tell you what. Again, kind of what I'm seeing out there. It's good news that the stimulus package was passed. But I think the economy, that's good for a Band-Aid, but the economy has to reopen. And the good news is, I'm pretty sure the government is aware of that. So expect the messaging and the signaling to be all that the government's going to reopen in the next few weeks, albeit it'll be region by region. So, what else? What else is good news? Well, I do think the number of cases in Italy, even though the number of new deaths spiked a little yesterday, but I do see that it's kind of stabilized. The other thing is, this is the most important thing. As we go into the weekend, very, very important, do not listen to the news headlines. Like last night, the main headline was, United States becomes the leader in number of coronavirus cases. That's because the U.S. has been testing hundreds of thousands of people. So obviously, there's going to be a quick ramping up of number of cases. What we're really interested in seeing is number of new deaths. And actually, it looks like the U.S. has kind of stabilized on number of new deaths per day. Now, we'll see. It's only been 4 or 5 days of that. We'll see if that sticks. But I think as New York City peaks, which who knows, it might not happen for another week or two, and New York City, where I live, is under pretty complete lockdown, and the hospitals are all full. But if New York City starts to peak, and New York City is 40%, New York City, this one city, is 40% of all cases in the United States, of all deaths in the United States. If New York City starts to stabilize, that means all the data in the country is going to stabilize. So why not send people in Ohio back to work, or people in Indiana, or people in the South, or people in Wyoming, whatever. But one thing that's really important is, even though I feel like it's a homework assignment a little bit, it does make me feel less anxious, and it makes me feel a little better when I do some productive work. So when I write down my 10 ideas a day, so every day I write down 10 ideas a day, at least twice a day I go up and down the stairs in my building. I'm on the 7th floor. It's good to keep. So if you listen to my podcast with Dr. David Sinclair, he recommended doing some cardio to strengthen your lungs, because this virus affects the lungs a lot. So you want to, if you don't have the virus, do things that will strengthen your lungs, like doing a little bit of cardio, and being creative, like write, or if you're a comedian, come up with jokes, or if you're, or write down 10 ideas a day, 10 businesses you could start. I'm very serious. I want to set up my t-shirt company, Wuhan College, or Wuhan Lacrosse, or I went to Wuhan and all I got was this lousy coronavirus. I don't know. That's my bad idea of the day. And another thing is, on remote learning, what business opportunities could there be on remote learning? Maybe you can teach a course of your favorite subject. Maybe you can, maybe you can decide, across all the different online learning platforms, what does a computer science major look like? What does a history major look like? What does a philosophy major look like? And you could curate your own degree program across all of the online schools. So I think nobody's done that yet, and I think that would be great. Here's another idea for a business. We should have a tipping jar on YouTube, or a tipping jar on Instagram. If you like someone's YouTube videos, or if you like someone's Twitter account, you should be able to tip them $0.25 or $1 or whatever. I don't know why nobody's ever made like a tipping jar for all of these social media accounts. And that would certainly solve a lot of problems as people are working home remotely and trying to be creative and so on. So, and in general, I just want to remind people again, this is kind of amazing. For the first time in world history, in the history of the human species, so the human species has been around for 250,000 years. For the first time in the history of the human species, all 7 billion people on the planet are united against one goal: fighting this virus. Now, many people disagree on the best way to fight the virus, but I think people in general are united. Don't let politics divide you. Don't let different mathematical models of panic divide you. Everybody should be quarantining and social distancing. Meanwhile, we'll keep track of the data. I'm always keeping track of the data. I'm talking to other doctors and professionals and even government people about the different data. Like, don't obsess on the panicky headlines. I kind of think the mainstream media should be held accountable for the hysteria that they're spamming society with. So I just avoid in general the headlines and try to stick to reliable sources of data. Don't let someone else's hysteria turn into your personal history. Your personal history, when you get out of this, is that we survived this. We survived 9/11. We survived the financial crisis. Now we're surviving the first crisis in the history of the human species to ever unite around one goal. And yes, people are going to get sick like they do every year. Yes, people are going to die. There's deaths all the time. There's deaths every year. Every death is horrible. We all might die. We all might die from this virus. But I can't live life assuming that. If I walk out in the street, I might get hit by a car. I can't avoid the street because of that. The economy will reopen. The best thing you can do is to reduce stress now. Work on something creative, or call someone you love, or do some of this networking. Like again, I've been emailing people I don't even know and saying, hey, congratulations on blah, blah, blah. You're doing this, this, this. I'm thinking of you during this crisis. Good luck. Don't ask for anything. Just network. So you can do any of these things. Write down 10 ideas a day. Write on that project I've been writing on. Or to be frank, some days I just binge watch TV. I have binge watched the entire series of Extras, Hello Ladies, The Jim Gaffigan Show, and one other sitcom I forgot. And I'm Curb Your Enthusiasm. And I'm binge watching right now Breaking Bad because I want my wife to see Better Call Saul. She never saw Better Call Saul, and I think that's a great show. So my email, if anyone wants to ask me questions on email, altucher@gmail.com. Also, I put together a list of my favorite quarantine books, and I'm actually giving them away to people. I'm having a little contest, and I'm giving my favorite quarantine books away to people. No strings attached at all. Other than, go check out my Instagram post. The instructions are just you have to follow me on Instagram, and you have to write in the comments your 3 favorite books, and then I'll select 6 people to get my favorite quarantine books. And a lot of people have been entering it, and I've been learning a lot. There's a lot of great book recommendations there as well. So even if you don't sign up for the book contest, check out all the book recommendations that are in the comments on my quarantine book giveaway on Instagram. How many styles of podcasting are there? That's a really good question. There's interview style. There's storytelling. There's all these true crime things. There's kind of debate style where myself and one other person, or you and one other person might debate things. I've always, for 6 years, I've done the interviewing style, and I've interviewed every hero of mine on the planet pretty much. But I also think I'm going to start switching a little bit more to storytelling style, where I tell some of my stories because I had so much fun writing those stories. Why not tell new stories? So I'm going to go back and forth. Also, I've been getting a little more topical on my podcast, which is I did a podcast about Iran after that happened. I've done now 4 or 5 podcasts about the coronavirus. As one of your 10 ideas a day, can you do your stand-up routine on IG Live? That's a good question. Maybe, but I feel like now all jokes that don't have to do with coronavirus are kind of boring. But there's a comedian, Mark Normand, who I was watching a YouTube video the other day of his, and he was doing corona comedy, he was calling it. And he was doing comedy about coronavirus. And I'm totally attributing it to Mark Normand. He had this one joke he was testing out, which, many people who have coronavirus have stopped drinking Corona beer, which doesn't make any sense because during the OJ trial, nobody stopped drinking orange juice. That was a joke from Mark Normand. I thought it was funny. Check out his YouTube video, Corona Comedy. And but I'm busy thinking of new material because old material now. The only material anyone cares about is coronavirus. Maria Branford's trying out new material on Zoom. I'm gonna check that out. Also, the club that I own, Stand Up New York, they've been doing comedy streaming as well. What am I most proud of? I'm most proud of how we as a society are coming together to stop this virus. So it's the first time again in 250,000 years, all of society has united around one goal. So we need to remind ourselves that there are things to be proud of during this time. But again, reduce stress, be creative, do some networking, get outside if you can, do anything you can to reduce stress over the next week, 2 weeks, whatever, but particularly over this weekend. Just focus one day at a time. Reducing stress is the best way you can help your friends, your family, all of society. Don't worry about anything else, and don't read panicky news headlines. I will post this video on my Instagram stories, the live stories. So yesterday I messed up.